Hello, everyone, and welcome to Gorilla Whale, a Godzilla watch-along podcast. I am your kaiju consultant, Kevin Carpenter.
And I am the tourist, double-fisting margaritas as she runs from the monsters, Kayla Knutson.
You know that was actually Jimmy Buffett in that movie?
Yes, I did know it was Jimmy Buffett in that movie.
They were like, hey, can we get Margaritaville in Jurassic Park? And he was like, sure, but I need to be in the movie double-fisting margaritas for like 2 seconds. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah. Cool.
He's an icon. He's a legend. He was the moment. R.I.P. to the king of vacations. The weekend he died was a 3-day weekend, which was real tight of him.
Real tight of him.
So that everybody could spend the weekend partying in remembrance. And guess who had to work all weekend?
Oof.
I should have been at the club. I should have been at the club. And instead I was at the customer service.
Well, unfortunately, we're not talking about Jimmy Buffett, nor Jurassic World. It was Jurassic World that he was in, yes.
It was Jurassic World he was in, which I saw in theaters.
Oof. Today, we're going over the climactic confrontation between two of tokusatsu's terrible titans, Mothra versus Godzilla. And if you want to know more about Mothra, audience, you can check out our bonus episode where Kayla and I talk about the original Mothra movie. Just head on over to our Ko-fi to unlock the bonus episodes playlist. We'll have a link in the show notes.
We'll be mentioning the original Mothra a little during this episode, but you also won't have to have seen it to understand Mothra versus Godzilla. These movies tend to ignore continuity whenever it works for them, which I appreciate. I respect. There's a lot of them. It would be... I'm a fan of comic books, so this isn't the first time where nebulous continuity or subjective continuity has been something that I've had to deal with.
It's interesting looking back on a lot of these movies from the era of the cinematic universe and like watching these films where it's like, yeah, Godzilla just shows up. Wasn't he in an iceberg last movie? Fuck you.
And again, all of these movies predate like the boom of home video.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes a lot of sense to me that they actually don't care that much about continuity because people aren't necessarily rewatching the old movies. Although it's interesting to note, there has been a lot said about whether, like, how rewatchable the MCU is. Because the MCU did start when home video was still a thing. Home video is still a thing, and I'm a big fan of physical media and being able to actually buy the DVDs for movies that I like, and I still do. But, the MCU started in, 2008, which Netflix was... I think Netflix was still just... I don't think they had the streamer yet. It was still just, mailing DVDs,
I think they had the streamer by 2008.
If they did, it wasn't huge yet. I mean, my family didn't get Netflix until several years later. And even then, a lot of people did not necessarily have, Netflix still yet. The point is, the MCU started... kind of before the streamers were in full swing.
Mm-hmm.
You did have digital renting, and streaming was a little bit of a thing because that was what the 2007-2008 writer strike was about.
Streaming was started Netflix started streaming in 2007.
Okay, so they had just started, but it wasn't... did you get Netflix streaming in 2007?
I don't think so.
No, it's the iPhone came out in 2007, but it's not like everybody suddenly had an iPhone in 2007.
And nowadays,
it took years. Yeah, I think it took a while for that to become ubiquitous, or even for for smartphones to become ubiquitous. I did not have a smartphone regularly until years later. But anyway, my point is people have gone back and forth on the rewatchability of the MCU and continuity in the MCU. The Godzilla movie, they didn't give a shit.
Yeah.
They were like, what do you mean? What's a VHS? We don't know what that is. The technology hasn't been invented yet. The best you could get was reruns on TV, which you could only see if you happened to be watching again, you couldn't, there was no on demand, there was no rentals, there's no way to tape anything. So yeah, continuity is...
So let's get right into this. So normally I do the historical context for these movies. There's not a whole lot of historical context behind Mothra versus Godzilla. So this one I'll keep short. The Olympics are coming to Tokyo in 1964, and Japan is cleaning up in preparation. A huge construction boom has now transformed the city into a vibrant metropolis. Television is capturing more market share, so the film industry is now pivoting to previously ignored demographics. Toho had recently released Mothra 2 years ago to win over the female audience, and they succeeded. Women loved Mothra. So now it's the perfect time to pit Mothra against Toho's atomic champion, just like they did with King Kong. On April 29th, 1964, Mothra vs. Godzilla releases.
I feel like this pits it a little bit as like battle of the sexes, which I just find hysterical.
It is a little bit.
I mean, Mothra is female-coded and Godzilla is male-coded, apparently.
Mm-hmm. Well, and, as we go on with the Showa era, these movies are more and more marketed toward, children. So it does become like an action figurification of Godzilla as we keep moving along.
This doesn't necessarily surprise me. I mean, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles started out as being for adults. The original comics are dark and gritty and violent and for adults. And then it transformed into something that was very much for kids. And you have had, in recent years, a return to adult-orientated TMNT properties, comics, like The Last Ronin is an adult comic aimed at an adult audience. And so, I don't know, it doesn't shock me that Batman does the same thing. We've touched on this a little bit in previous episodes. These huge pop culture juggernauts that have a ton of meaning, for lack of a better term, entwined in them. That start off, maybe being very serious. Not that Batman started off being particularly serious. Batman was originally for kids. Maybe for a slightly older audience, but it was for kids. The comic books, adults were not the main audience of comic books in the 30s and 40s. It doesn't shock me that there's this elasticity to Godzilla.
Yeah, and with Batman shifts between being serious, being goofy, being serious, being kid-friendly. Batman just kind of has that cultural market share. And it's interesting to see the transition with Godzilla, noting what's going on in this time period, Toho's business ideals shifting Godzilla from where he started as a horror monster that was very clearly a metaphor for atomic annihilation, and now he becomes more and more of just a character to throw at other giant monsters. And hey, let's see if we can get Godzilla to also be kid friendly, so that way we can throw more tanks at him and sell some action figures and all that good stuff. And I think
when you make your character design cute adjacent, that's easy to happen. If Godzilla was more eldritch and horrifying, I don't think he would have been pivoted to be more kid-friendly. But because his design is like a dinosaur, and kids love dinosaurs, it was very easy for Toho to transition, yeah.
And women love moths. We know that.
And women love moths. And the thing, John Carpenter's The Thing, I doubt we're ever going to see that transitioned for children, because that thing's horrifying. Fun
fact, actually, the American release of this movie was not Mothra versus Godzilla. It was Godzilla versus The Thing.
Yeah, which... Did the original The Thing predate Godzilla or Mothra versus Godzilla?
No. John Carpenter's The Thing was made way after this.
No, John Carpenter's is a remake.
Oh, wait, what?
Yeah, surprise!
Original The Thing movie.
Not only is it a remake, it was actually poorly received when it first came out.
Is this The Thing from Another World?
1938. Oh, a 1938 novella. I'm sorry.
How dare you?
Wait. Oh, a faithful adaptation of the novella following 1951's The Thing from Another World.
There we
go. Yes.
Okay. So
I knew it was a remake. I fucking knew.
Fascinating. I find that interesting that when they released it to American audiences, it was this is Godzilla versus The Thing, because people aren't going to see a giant moth movie. The American studios did not understand Mothra's appeal. And we're going to get right into that as I go into the movie summary here. Kayla, any last thoughts before I get into my ramblings?
It does not shock me that the American studio audiences didn't understand the appeal of Mothra, because I do think Mothra is For lack of a better term, I think Mothra is very Japanese. I think it's very anime.
It is.
You know, so when we talk about like the cultural exchange between Japan and America and something being like, oh, really like anime-esque or whatever, on our end as Americans, you know, receiving this media outside the context of its original culture and then like being interested in it or recommending it to people. Some people like they don't get it. They're like, oh, I don't like, it's too anime, is, you know, it's too much. And I do think Mothra is very, very Japanese, and it's difficult to articulate why.
Well, I think it's because Mothra is weird.
Yeah.
Mothra is a reincarnating moth god.
Yeah, Mothra is really weird in a way that you see often in Japanese media specifically. And yeah, I mean, America has like a lot of weird stuff, but it's a different type of weird.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the best way to put it is just like porn, I know it when I see it.
All right, let's get into this. Hack. We open on a powerful typhoon tearing apart docks and throwing boats in the air. The next day, a giant egg is discovered off the shores of Nishi Beach. The local fishermen race to claim it and bring it ashore. Reporter Ichiro Saki and photographer Junko Nakanishi are on the scene. First, they find a strange, colorful object in the water. Then, they speak with Professor Miura about the giant egg. But before they can learn more, businessman Kumayama arrives to say he has just bought the giant egg for his company, Happy Enterprises. Specifically, he calculated the giant egg's worth to be about 153,820 chicken eggs and paid the fishermen accordingly. And honestly, that math checks out. Saki, Junko, and Miura team up to figure out how they can get the giant egg out of Kumayama's hands. Meanwhile, Kumayama meets with his financial partner, Torahata, who wants to build an amusement park around the giant egg to make it a tourist attraction. During their discussion, two tiny twin fairies appear in the room and plead for them to release the egg. The two businessmen, seeing another opportunity, attempt to kidnap the fairies, but the fairies get away. The twin fairies then meet with Sakai, Junko, and Professor Miura out in the woods. The fairies explain that they are from Infant Island, and that the giant egg actually belongs to Mothra, who of course wants it back. The trio attempt to convince the businessmen with this new knowledge, but Kumayama is only interested in buying the fairies. Losing hope, the twin fairies hitch a ride back to Infant Island with Mothra, who was apparently there the whole time. Happy Enterprises gets to work building a giant incubator for the egg. As time passes, Professor Miura discovers that the strange object Sakai and Junko found on the beach was highly radioactive. We cut over to a construction site where workers blast the ground apart and, oh gosh, wouldn't you know it, Godzilla was there the whole time.
He was buried.
He was there. He was having a nap underground.
To be having a nap underground.
Angry at his explosive awakening, Godzilla goes on another rampage. With two whole problems to deal with now, our trio brainstorms solutions with chief editor Maruda and egg-loving reporter Nakamura. They come up with an idea. While it may sound primitive and unscientific, perhaps through the fairies, they could ask Mothra for help. Yeah, that's right. That's where the meme's from.
Meme.
We're uncovering history.
It's so good, though. It's such a good meme. It is primitive and unscientific, but you know, like it does not work.
Hey there, Kevin here, from the future. I messed up. That line is from the next movie. There are just multiple instances of humanity having to ask the fairies for Mothra's help. Anyway.
Continue.
Our crew venture to Infant Island, where the native inhabitants are rightly pissed off. Infant Island has been ravaged by atomic bomb testing, and they still don't have their giant egg. Why should they help Japan? Photographer Junko pleads with the fairies with a passionate speech about how Godzilla will kill innocent people and how humanity is flawed, but with work, people can come together to create a better world. Mothra is moved by these words and agrees to kick Godzilla's ass. Back in Japan, Kumayama and Torahata get into a violent argument in Torahata's hotel room over money. Kumayama beats up Torahata and tries to steal from his personal safe. Torahata regains consciousness, grabs a gun, and shoots Kumayama. Torahata then sees Godzilla right outside his window, but still takes time to gather up his money. This proves to be a fatal mistake as Godzilla destroys the hotel, crushing Torahata.
Listen, if I was fleeing a country, well, if I was fleeing, like, destruction, I would want some cold hard cash with me, but there's morals in this story, so.
Yep. The military tries to stop Godzilla with tanks, bombs, and yet another giant electric fence, although this time they throw giant metal nets on Godzilla to switch it up a little. None of this works. Godzilla soon arrives at the giant egg, but just as all hope seems lost, Mothra arrives on the scene. The two kaiju fight it out, with Mothra using skirmisher tactics to fly in and out of Godzilla's reach. She also beats her wings and hits Godzilla with hurricane force winds and a poisonous powder. At one point, Mothra grabs Godzilla's tail and drags him across the ground. But Godzilla finally lands a shot on Mothra with his atomic breath, and with a burning wing, Mothra falls out of the sky and lands next to her giant egg. Mothra has been slain. But this movie isn't over. As Godzilla retreats, the twin fairies begin singing to the giant egg just as the natives on Infant Island perform a ritual dance. The giant egg hatches, and Mothra is reincarnated into not one, but two giant larvae. This transformation comes just in time, as Godzilla is now approaching Iwa Island, where a class of school children are stranded and helpless.
Of course there are stranded school children. Oh, God.
The twin Mothra larvae confront Godzilla, and they engage in a kaiju shootout. As Godzilla fires his atomic breath, the Mothra larvae duck behind giant rocks and shoot Godzilla with their silk string, eventually encasing him in a cocoon. Godzilla struggles against the cocoon and then falls into the ocean. With Godzilla now defeated, the twin fairies hitch a ride back to Infant Island with their two new larva deities. Our human heroes wave goodbye to the fairies and promise to thank them by creating a better world. So, Kayla, what'd you think?
Well, I liked that they foreshadowed the cocoon by trying to use nets. And then, literally, once the cocoon started going, I was like, it's the nets again.
It is interesting that it's like the giant metal nets did actually do a good job of incapacitating Godzilla next to the giant electric fence. Like, first off, where did they have the giant metal nets? Maybe they just made it in a glass box that's like break in case of Godzilla.
Yeah, nobody is surprised. Well, I mean, they're surprised by Godzilla, but Godzilla isn't new to them. Mm-hmm. So I fully believe that in the loose continuity of this world, Godzilla has raged before, and they think he shall rage again, and thus they have employed countermeasures. You know, they have a Godzilla defense fund with prototypes for ways to defeat Godzilla and a discretionary budget for steel nets.
Yeah, honestly, that makes sense.
Two, I was watching this, I was like, I understand where Pokemon came from. Because I was like, Mothra used Whirlwind. It was super effective. And then it was like two fucking Caterpies defeated Dino Knight. Is it Dino Knight? Now I'm Dragonite. Dino Knight. It's Dragonite. I'm not a poser. I had a poster of the original 151 on my door for years.
Oh man, we're way past the original 151. There's like 500 of those suckers now.
I don't necessarily... there's 500? You think there's only 500 Pokemon? Sir, there's well over 1,000 at this point. Keep up. It was fun to watch this and be like, oh yeah, this is a Pokemon battle.
Well, and I really loved the fight in this movie. Like, you know, I'm just going to break the suspense here real quick. This is one of my favorite Godzilla movies. Like, this is in my top 5. End of this episode, 5 out of 5.
Damn, your top 5?
Yes.
Oh my god.
I think Mothra versus Godzilla, like, very perfectly captures the essence of, like, Showa Godzilla. Like, you have these two signature kaijus coming to blows for the first time. I love Mothra. Of course I love Godzilla. I like that it's like the human characters are like nice without overstaying their welcome. I like that there's, you know, these two big kaiju fights that actually are very interesting. I love that it gets weird. The first time I watched this movie and the twist of like, not only does Mothra reincarnate from the egg, but also it's 2 larvae instead of, like 1 Mothra larva is like, oh, okay, that's a twist I did not see coming. And it really opens up like the possibilities of how weird these kaiju can get. And as we go into more Godzilla movies, we're going to see some weird kaijus.
Yeah, I mean, I can see how this is like a seminal point within the franchise, for sure. I guess more than anything, I'm like, oh, we're not very far in, and we've already hit 2 out of your top 5 with the original Godzilla and Godzilla vs. Mothra.
Honestly, we're gonna see if that list changes as we do this project. I'm open to reevaluating my scoring system here.
That's fair.
But Mothra vs. Godzilla is one of my favorite Godzilla movies.
It's fun. I think if I was a little kid in 1960s Japan sitting in the theater watching Godzilla or Mothra versus Godzilla for the first time, I probably would have been like absolutely enchanted. I did enjoy it. I did want to kill the main reporter guy. What was his name?
Saki?
Ichiro Saki?
Yeah.
Yeah, fuck that guy.
Why?
He was so rude. He was so rude to Nakamichi. All over the place. Criticizing her constantly. Like, he's like, how hard can it be to take a couple of photos? Shut the fuck up. I was the reporter photographer duo from Mothra. They were partners in journalism. They were equals. They were both funny and they respected each other. But Saki was a rude dick. I texted Kevin while I was watching this movie and I was like, I'm gonna kill this man. I thought that he was unnecessarily mean and rude to her all over the place. He was incredibly condescending, which surprised me because we haven't seen that in a Honda Godzilla movie. And I mean, from a character that's supposed to be a hero, I just thought that he was really rude. And I mean, I guess it is like the 1960s. So
just having a working woman on the screen is kind of a big
yeah,
enough
that's
thing.
groundbreaking. So, it's not like his behavior is super out of place culturally in the 1960s. But, yeah, it was especially coming from Mothra, where the female photographer, male reporter duo, they felt like so much more like equals. And they were, like, no one was mean to each other. But in this one, he was, like, rude and berating her, like, all of the time. Especially in the beginning when we first meet him. So, I mean, maybe that went away as the movie went on, but my first impression of him was, like, he's a dick. So it was hard for me to get past that with him. I did like the one that kept eating an egg. There's a running gag in this movie, where one reporter is just constantly eating, like, mostly hard-boiled eggs, but not entirely. Anytime, especially that they're talking about the giant Mothra egg that that Happy Enterprises has taken as an attraction.
Oh yeah, the editor will be like, "Go investigate that egg," and it will cut to him just holding a hard-boiled egg and looking down and just being like, "Huh?"
It's like a half-eaten hard. Yeah, it's. I was like, this is a funny gag. This is a stupid gag, but I love a stupid gag like that.
Did you recognize any of those actors, by the way?
Was I supposed to?
So here's the deal. While I was watching this movie, I was like, hey, wait a minute. Some of these people look familiar. And I started like looking into like the role that I originally had that familiarity with. And then I saw like, oh, hey, that person was in a previous Godzilla movie. And then I looked into another person. I'm like, oh, hey, that person was originally in a Godzilla movie. And that person was originally in Mothra. And I just went down this rabbit hole. Turns out Toho really likes to reuse actors. And I mean like actors who played major characters in previous movies and then make them main characters but different characters in another movie that is kind of in the same continuity, but we are also pre-cinematic universe. Just a few examples here. So the reporter Sakai, that's Akira Takarada, and he is also Ogata in the original Godzilla.
Oh!
The egg guy, Nakamura, in this movie is Furure in King Kong vs. Godzilla.
Oh! I mean, everybody looked kind of... I will say, and this isn't just me like saving face, I'm not recognizing anybody. They did look like familiar, but I just didn't ping that I had definitely seen them before. Because I was like, wow, all of these people look familiar. And then in the back of my head, I was like, Kayla, that's racist. It was like, no, they did look familiar. They did look familiar. I've seen them before.
I'm not done.
Oh, jeez.
So Torahata, the corrupt businessman in this movie, is Kazuo Fujita, which is like the wire guy fiance in King Kong versus Godzilla. Professor Miura in this movie is Dr. Chujo in Mothra. So he plays a doctor in Mothra and then a completely different doctor in Mothra versus Godzilla.
The hot guy! My hot guy! Okay, I feel better.
Let's see. Chief editor Maruda in this movie is General Shinzo in King Kong versus Godzilla. And let's see, one more. And the corrupt businessman Kumayama, the guy with the kinda Hitler stash, but not quite, so it's still acceptable.
Yeah. It's a Walt Disney mustache.
Yeah, he is a boat ship captain in King Kong versus Godzilla. So like we have 6 cast members that played big roles in like the previous Godzilla and Mothra movies, and then they brought them back as different characters, not even completely different characters. Like Hiroshi Koizumi plays, like I said, a doctor in Mothra and then another doctor in Mothra versus Godzilla. Mm-hmm. By the way, real quick, Yoshio Tsuchiya, which was the guy who was in Seven Samurai and wanted to be in Godzilla, and then he was in Godzilla Raids Again.
Yeah.
He does not return until Godzilla number 6, Invasion of Astro Monster. So keep an eye out for that.
Okay. The hot doctor guy, Dr. Chujo in Mothra, he had facial hair in Mothra, I think, which was part of why I did not totally recognize him. I mean, it's not shocking that they're using like a stable of actors. It's pretty common for filmmakers and for studios to do. And in fact, it used to be like the business model in Hollywood, like the studio model was that you signed to a studio. Mm-hmm. You know, like that's where the stars in Paramount come from, in the Paramount logo. That's where movie star comes from. That you would have a contract stable of actors assigned to a studio, and then you would be assigned, you'd have to do like 10 movies or whatever, and then they would basically like tell you what movie you were gonna be in. And you could have some control, you know, but it was really like you were just kind of on call to be in a movie when they wanted you to be in a movie, and you couldn't. It was like a whole thing if you wanted to go do a movie at another studio. It was a whole thing that they had to like work out. And Paramount would put a new star in its logo whenever it had a new contracted actor. So the amount of stars in the Paramount logo would change depending on how many contracted actors they had. And they would call them their stars, so that's where we get movie star, is from that Paramount logo and that gimmick of each star representing a different contracted actor that like quote unquote belonged to the studio.
That's a really interesting bit of Hollywood history right there.
Yeah, I don't know how Japan's cinema industry worked exactly. I don't know if they had something similar. But even if they did not have the same system, we still see in modern Hollywood that studios often will go back to the same actors, or will make contracts with actors still. Like Tom Cruise, I think, does almost everything with Paramount. You know, they'll get like some sort of first look deal, or they'll sign on to do X amount of pictures. Like, I mean, it happens with the Marvel actors, of course, but that's all the same continuity. Mm-hmm. But even then, I mean, Mike Flanagan is famous for working with the same handful of actors like over and over and over again. And honestly, that's always, as somebody that like has worked in the industry, when I see that a director and an actor and like a writer, or that a group of filmmakers are continuously working together project after project, year after year, when it's not something like the MCU where it's a contracted like continuity thing, but where it's different projects, where it's not the same continuity, where you'd have to sign on over and over and over again, I'm always like, that's a green flag, because it's a sign that they like working together, which means they're probably good to work with. So yeah, I mean, that doesn't shock me, but it is pretty funny.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like, I understand them reusing actors for different movies, but these movies are ostensibly in like the same kind of continuity. So it's kind of like if you watch like the original Iron Man, and then the guy who played Obadiah Stane, you know, he's like, oh, he's the main villain of Iron Man 1. And then Iron Man 2, that same actor comes back. It's like, oh, hey, it's my business associate, Max.
Yeah, I guess it's a little like, it reminds me kind of how like theater troupes would work. In that an actor would play, like traditionally, you know, a theater troupe would have kind of like the same cast of actors, you know, but then people would be, one guy is Macbeth in Macbeth, and then another guy, like that same guy is then going to be like Mercutio in Romeo and Juliet, and you just kind of scramble it up and whatnot. I mean, it's very high school theater.
Oh yeah. Well, and I understand that. Like I said, those are still like different stories, but it's
That's true.
It's
they
fun.
are still
but
different
if there was
stories.
a Macbeth 2 and then the guy playing Macbeth was suddenly a different guy.
Macbeth 2, The Revenge of Macbeth's Ghost.
Yeah, Macbeth's ghost comes in and it's like, I've learned nothing.
Yeah. Oh man.
Someone get to writing Macbeth 2.
Oh man, I wish Shakespeare knew about sequels.
Hoy.
They didn't really do that back then.
And it's interesting looking back at this, like, continuity is what we make of it kind of style of filmmaking. Because I also noticed that with this movie's interpretation of Infant Island. Because, like, they go in and it's like this one small set with, like, a giant whale skull or something like that. And it looks really bad. And then they go into, like, the generic rock temple set. And that's all we see of Infant Island. And then, like, the original Mothra, it's this, like, big, lush landscape with these, like, mutant plants and vampire vines and all this different stuff.
It's totally different.
Yeah, it's totally different. And they justify it as, like, the atomic testing has made this island worse. And there's actually a, from Ishiro Honda, A Life in Film, From Godzilla to Kurosawa, there's a quote that the main reason for that change was budget reasons. Ishiro Honda was like, I wanted to visualize the terror and the power of the atomic bomb. Ishiro Honda is still putting that message in these movies. The first island scene was supposed to be more graphic and realistic, but the art department didn't have enough budget to make the set that I wanted.
Well, it's interesting that in the original Mothra, the atomic effects upon the environment is kind of annihilation-esque.
Yeah.
I think was what I said, in that you've got now this mutant technicolor environment of all of these like sci-fi creatures and plants and, vampire vines suddenly, which is a very 50s-esque kind of look at what atomic energy could potentially do and the power of radiation and stuff. And then we get to Mothra versus Godzilla, and I mean, I guess it was for budgetary reasons, but it's a completely different, instead of this vibrant, mutated, dangerous life, there's no life. There's a whale skeleton, it's desiccated, it's decayed, it's way more realistic to actual atomic bomb fallout. But the fact that that happened because of the budget and not like any sort of intentional understanding. I mean, I guess he did want to, visualize, as he said, visualize the terror and the power of the atomic bomb.
Yeah, it sounds like he wanted to make it worse.
Yeah, but considering, like, he did want to make it more realistic, but the budget wasn't what he wanted it to be. So, I don't know. I'd like to know, I guess, what his original vision was.
Wouldn't we all?
I do think it is interesting that they have changed drastically between the two movies, the effects of the bomb on Infant Island. And there's no more, like, anti-radiation juice.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in Mothra, there's an anti-radiation juice that they make. It looks like red Kool-Aid that staves off the effects of radiation. This time around, there's none of that. The island is just like suffering and decaying. The islanders, which again are Japanese people in blackface, just as an acknowledgement of that, they're pissed about the atomic bombs. Honda carefully sidesteps who might be dropping these atomic bomb tests. We know that somebody is, and the islanders do seem to blame Japan for it, but it's more of like, they consider Japan to be a part of the outside world, and they blame the outside world for this.
Yeah.
And I think in the dub, not the dub, but in the version I watched, the captions, the Islanders kept saying, like, stuff about, we don't trust humans, so it's almost like, and I don't know if that was, like, a thing with the translation at all. The Islanders using the term humans to refer to the rest of the world, sort of aligning themselves as, like, an otherworldly creature, like the fairies. And it's not that Islanders aren't meant to be like people. The Islanders are people, but they are distinguishing themselves very much from the Japanese outsiders that have come to talk to them, and they are aligning, like, they're like, we don't care whether or not it's your government, like, all of you outsider humans are we blame all of you, kind of a thing.
It goes more into that like theme that they hammer into this movie of like, hey, we're all disparate people and there's a lot of jerks out there, but like if we work hard, we can like the optimistic, like if we work hard, we can create a better society, even despite our differences. And I do like that Mothra framed this, like good kaiju is like, this impassioned speech has convinced me to go out and actually help you guys. I'm going to be honest, I have a funny headcanon that like Mothra originally wasn't going to do it and then heard that Godzilla was back. And Mothra's like, oh, I hate that guy. I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing this to kick his ass.
Yeah, she's like, I want to throw down with this guy who I've never met before. Well, they posit in the movie that they're like, well, maybe Mothra will help us because she will think that Godzilla will, like, eat her egg.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, oh my god, the acknowledgement that Godzilla is hungry. Yay! Because he's not allowed to fucking eat people. And that was my whole thing with the original Godzilla movie was they're like, Godzilla is hungry and then he doesn't eat anybody.
When we got to that scene when Godzilla was going after the school children, were you just like, yes, finally, he's gonna eat someone.
Eat. I just want to see, he's an animal. He's supposed to be driven. Yes, he's a metaphor for atomic destruction, but they also are like, well, he's also a giant beast and an animal, and he's hungry, so I want him to act like a monster, I mean, the kaiju in Pacific Rim are specifically meant to be a destruction task force. They are a demolition crew being sent by aliens to Earth to wreak as much havoc and cause extinction events. Godzilla is not that. Yes, he's an existential crisis, but also They talk so much about how he is like a real animal with biological urges and needs to eat.
The characterization of Godzilla in this movie is interesting because his rampage, one, he's pissed off that he got woken up by an explosion, but a lot of the damage he does seems like accidental.
Yeah.
Like he's very much out of place in this like more modern Japan. Like he gets his tail stuck in a tower. He like slips on this ledge and like crashes into this castle. Like he kind of just sideswipes the hotel on his way to the giant egg. Like he's literally just like walking around.
Yeah, he's more of a bull in a china shop instead of an avenging angel. I mean, it is kind of interesting. Like we start out this movie with one businessman who's like going through, they're like, oh, we're developing this area into like an industrial zone, et cetera, and it's been flooded by the typhoon. So they're trying to get all of the water out of this. And it's from this area that Godzilla emerges. So your question is then like, well, how long was he buried under there? Is he only disturbed because they started developing the area? Did he get like washed in by a storm and buried and he's like been hibernating? We don't know. But it is interesting, I think, that he emerges because of the economic industrial development of this previously desolate area, or maybe desolate is the wrong word, but previously undeveloped area. And Mothra's egg is taken by evil Happy Enterprises for exploitation. Once more, which is very aligned with the original Mothra film, which had the twin fairies being used and exploited for entertainment purposes, which the corporates tried to do again.
A lot of similar plot beats to the original Mothra.
Yeah. And the fact that this movie is coming out as Tokyo is preparing for the Olympics and is quote-unquote cleaning up. I mean, now there has been a lot of discussion in the last several years through the past few Olympics, the cost of a city hosting the Olympics and the way that it has a kind of a negative effect on the homeless population of a city because they are displaced and not really actually given a proper place to go. They're just kind of chucked out of the city without any sort of actual help. They're considered unwanted and completely shunted. The lower income workers that tend to get overworked to build these arenas and whatnot. I mean, you guys can just Google, the economic costs of the Olympics upon the cities that have hosted them to see the actual underbelly. I mean, I enjoy watching the Olympics and I enjoy the spirit of coming together and friendly competition or whatever, but the economic cost of it is staggering. And Los Angeles is going to be hosting the Olympics in 2028. So we're about to see here at home the efforts and the cost of hosting the Olympics. And I don't know, it's an interesting... I wonder if Honda was like looking at the way that Japan was trying to like rapidly develop and industrialize in order to host the Olympics, and considering like, is everything that's happening like good? You know, what are the costs that we are incurring to do this? Because it does seem that once again, industrialization and capitalism have become villains in this franchise, which is specifically a thing with Mothra, but the development is like a new thing, and I don't know how much of this is Honda taking like pot shots, or not pot shots, but firing shots, and how much of it is just kind of like some convenient plot stuff, I mean, he's a very intentional filmmaker, I think, so I don't think it's necessarily an accident. But considering how like devastated Japan was coming out of the war, recovery and economic development is necessary. But it is interesting that Honda was maybe sitting there like, are we maybe overdeveloping in some areas? Are we protecting environments that we should be protecting? Or, what's going on? Like, who's winning? Who's making money? Is this all good?
Yeah, and I think it's like the Japan that Godzilla rampages through in the first movie is a different Japan than the one that Godzilla rampages through in this movie. And I think that's what he's highlighting with Godzilla, like accidentally like crushing buildings and getting his tail stuck in like broadcast towers and all that. Like even like Godzilla is even more alien in this world now. Behind the scenes fun fact, by the way, the scene where Godzilla stumbles and then crashes against that one castle. So, first off, some of the teeth get knocked out of the Godzilla suit in that stunt, and then they just keep it like that. It also messes up the jaw of the Godzilla suit, so it like flaps a little bit for the rest of the movie, but they really loved that shot, so they just kept it like that for the rest of the movie.
Oh, I love that. He got checked like a hockey player.
Yeah, and there's also another bit where like the army like drops napalm or like fires bombs at Godzilla, and he catches on fire a little. That wasn't planned. The Godzilla suit caught fire on accident, and the Godzilla actor kept acting because that's his goddamn job.
Oh my god. Wow. I applaud his... While I'm all for safety on set, I do applaud his dedication, I have to say.
God. I do appreciate that they had these like two destructive scenes to the Godzilla suit, and then they're like, yeah, let's keep that in the movie. That's the real stuff.
Yeah, I mean, when you get the shot, you get the shot.
You get the shot.
Yeah. It's just interesting how we've the specter of atomic annihilation does return and is very much there, where it's been, in some of the movies, it's like faded a little, but it definitely has come back. But it is interesting to see Honda start like looking around at a developing Japan and like beginning to criticize, corporations and unfettered capitalism and industrialization. And this isn't me sitting here in my air-conditioned comfortable apartment with my coffee and my headphones and all of the things that industrialization and capitalism has given me and saying fuck all of it. But time and again, we have seen how unregulated and unfettered and unrestricted forces, including industrialization and capitalism, can be incredibly destructive and harmful. And it's interesting to see that sort of message kind of coming into these movies, because there is like a measure of environmentalism to it. Like we did see a little bit of that in Mothra with the effects of the atomic radiation on the island. And then again, like the whale skeleton in this movie, it's very stark, especially as a child that grew up in the late 90s when Save the Whales was at its peak, and that was the sort of imagery that was used to talk about environmentalism and ecological disasters and stuff. It did kind of hit, and I was like, oh, Honda's sort of expanding upon his like messaging. I do think he did say one of his most radical statements in this film, and it was towards the end, and it was when I think it was when they were talking to the Islanders or whatever, or trying to like plead with Godzilla, or sorry, not Godzilla, with Mothra or the fairies or something. Where was it? Oh yeah. Evil people have a right to live too. And I wrote that down immediately. And I do think it is probably one of Honda's most radical statements, because I do think that when we talk about morality and when we talk about, crime and punishment, and, there's sort of this whole thing where it's like, well, evil people, like, they're evil. Fuck them. They deserve to die, etc., etc. And dehumanization is dangerous. And dehumanization as the first step towards violence and genocide, even against people that you consider evil. And, we can talk about how, like, morality is or isn't subjective, how evil is or isn't subjective, etc. And how there are some people that are objectively evil. The easy one, of course, is Hitler. But this concept that because they're arguing to have Mothra save them, and they're like, why would we save you? Like, these corporates, they've taken the egg, they won't give it back, you've bombed our island, etc. And their argument is like, yes, but evil people deserve to live too. And this undeniable fundamental right to life is an incredibly radical statement still. The idea that, like, nobody deserves death, even the most evil and wretched of souls, that is a very hard line ideology that a lot of people, no matter how, like, leftist they claim themselves to be, have, like, struggled with. And it's something I don't know. I was just like, whoa, like, I don't know. I thought it was, like, really cool. Whether you agree with it or not, Honda threw down that gauntlet.
And you contrast that with, like, Godzilla and Mothra's roles in these movies. Like, an interpretation of them could very well be the karmic justice of nature. Like, not only Godzilla crushing the hotel while the corrupt businessmen are literally done in by their own greed, but also, like, Mothra in the original movie coming in and using hurricane force winds to destroy these cities in search of her twin fairies. And then in this movie, it very much kind of reads as this, like, pleading toward, like, Mother Gaia or, like, a religious figure of just, like, we know we've messed up, but please still help us. Like, there's still, like, good in this world. And Godzilla, like, I think the speech specifically with the photographer, she says, like, Godzilla is not only going to kill, he's going to kill both good and bad people. Godzilla will not discriminate. He's just going to kill.
And that's where we get to the crux of why, like, the merit behind the statement, evil people deserve to live too, because Godzilla's not going to discriminate. Godzilla doesn't care if you're good or evil. You're going to get squished under his foot and burned alive by his atomic breath. But when we say evil people deserve to live too, well, then it comes down to, well, who gets to decide good and evil? And as soon as you start putting down, and this is what, like, a lot of, like, radicals would really argue, is once you start putting down parameters for the exceptions, that is a goalpost that can be moved. And I don't know, it was fascinating. I thought Honda had a lot of balls to say that in the 1960s.
I think that's a unique strength of these kaiju movies as well, because the kaijus are characters, but the kaijus are not people. They are natural disasters, or they are, the creations of man gone wrong, or, a ton of different origins. But at the end of the day, they're these giant monsters that are separated from humanity. Mothra is sympathetic, mostly because she has, like, a few pet humans she keeps around and takes on this role of a deity to these islanders. But Mothra has also been shown to not care about the well-being of the rest of human civilization unless, she's pleaded to in impassioned speech. And, like, Mothra will also destroy whole cities in order to, like, get her twin fairies back that we saw in the original Mothra movie. Mothra is actually toned down in this movie than in the original Mothra. I feel like original Mothra would have destroyed Japan in order to get the giant egg back, but Mothra just goes back to the island. But it's this, because of that, these kaiju give a unique perspective on a lot of these societal ills. Like, a lot of times, especially the twin fairies will be like, man, it really sucks that this is about to happen, but because you guys can't get your shit together, this is about to happen.
Yeah, they do represent these forces of nature and these existential threats that humanity has to work together to get around.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's not shocking, I suppose, that Ishiro Honda and his monster movies are particularly radical considering the context of the original Godzilla.
Mm-hmm.
But also considering films like Godzilla Raids Again, it is always nice when we kind of come back to that. And I mean, this was a movie that was made to be a blockbuster hit for the kids and the families, a 4-quadrant film for everybody to love and munch popcorn to. And still, Ishiro Honda is sitting up on his director's chair, shouting through the megaphone, "All art is political."
Yep. Oh, yeah. Especially Godzilla.
Yeah. So, I don't know. It was cool. I also thought, speaking of all art is political and Honda's beliefs, we do have, again, journalists are a central characters in this film, just as they were in Mothra, which is new for Godzilla a little bit. We haven't had journalists as like the main characters in a Godzilla movie yet.
Well, except for Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Sorry, yes.
Remember
Which
Raymond
was
Burr?
an American. Yes, but that wasn't Honda. That was the Americans doing that. This is the first time Ishiro Honda has centered journalists in a Godzilla movie. An interesting thing that happens with the journalists, they're sitting in the office bemoaning all of the free press that they're giving these evil corporates who are holding the egg hostage, and they don't care about the threat of Mothra to Japan or Godzilla or anything like that. They just care about making money. And we do see the executives stiffing the locals out of the money they said that they would pay them.
Oh, yeah.
Or using like contractual loopholes to not pay them when the locals thought they would get paid. They're like, "We won't pay you until opening day." And they're like, "It's been like a year, It was Saki, I think it was, who's like, "I feel so helpless." And his editor said, "A newspaper is never helpless." And then goes on to be like, "Your pen is mightier than any weapon." And I just thought, coming out of Mothra, which did have journalists as the heroes, and this discovery of truth, and also like when do we hide the quote unquote truth because it's actually safer. These people need to be like protected from the truth. Exposing them to the public would endanger them, etc. It was cool to see that like come back, that idea of the press as an important estate in society, and the concept that like, no, a newspaper is never helpless, because a newspaper in its platonic ideal is the pursuit of truth and knowledge for the public good.
Well, I think it makes sense for Ishiro Honda to have this opinion, especially living in Japan after years of censorship.
Yeah. So it's, I don't know, there's like so much in this insane, weird ass kids film. There is so many radical statements that Ishiro Honda is making. And it's, I mean, like I said, he's sitting on his director's chair yelling through the megaphone, "All art is political. Eat your popcorn and deal with it."
I love talking about the themes of this movie, but real quick, I do also just want to get into the brass tacks and the kaiju fighting, because watching this movie also made me think of, like, have you heard of the rock, paper, scissors theory of boxing?
I have not.
So it's this loose theory within boxing. It's not like sacred law, but it's a kind of a great 101 to make you think of like different boxing styles and like how they kind of like hit against each other. The main theory is that, like, think of a triangle, and on one point of the triangle you have your sluggers. Those are the big guys who take a bunch of damage and deal a bunch of damage, and that's Godzilla. Then you have your swarmers, and they're the little guys who get in your face and hit you with 100 punches and don't let you breathe, never back off. That's Anguirus. And then you have your outboxers, and those are the ones that dance around the ring and use their reach to like get in, hit you, get out, like that kind of thing. And that's Mothra. And the rock, paper, scissors theory is that sluggers beat swarmers, swarmers beat outboxers, and outboxers beat Godzilla. And it's interesting to see like that theory kind of come into place, because like, yeah, Godzilla is the ultimate slugger and he beats Anguirus, but Mothra takes care of Godzilla because she like gets in and out and like messes with him.
She tires him out.
Yeah, he tires him out. Like, Godzilla has one ranged attack, which is the atomic breath, and he needs to recharge that. Like, the only reason he beats Mothra the first time is because he gets a lucky shot in. But like before that, like, Mothra's kind of kicking his ass.
This is so silly. I love it. It makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah, they do represent the rock, paper, scissors theory of boxing.
By the way, just for the interest of completion, in the center of that triangle are the puncher boxers, and those are the people that are kind of in between those styles or who are skilled enough to switch between those styles, and that's King Kong.
I, okay. Sure.
Listen, these are these are kaiju movies. We do have to analyze the kaiju fighting, and this is the framework I choose to look at these movies here.
That's, you were a wrestler, so I don't know why I'm shocked.
Though, to be clear, wrestling and boxing are two separate things, but
they're different. Yes. But I know that. But yeah, no, that makes sense to me.
Well, and it's interesting to look at it from that framework, because it's like you look at, the base reaction, Mothra versus Godzilla. It's like, oh, a giant moth versus, a big dinosaur. Like, of course Godzilla's going to win. But like Mothra, like I said, can just like fly in and out, mess with him, and then fly out before she's in his reach. And also she has a bunch of ranged attacks. She has her wings, she has her poison powder. I think in a later movie she gets lasers. And then when she turns into larvae, she's shooting silk string at Godzilla and using cover. Like it turns into a shootout, and Godzilla doesn't win shootouts.
She is much more mobile than him. She does wear him out a lot. And when she picks him up by his tail and drags him like a caiman, it was so funny. I was just like, yeah, sure, why not?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah, she's a giant moth. Moths are strong. I mean, spiders are really strong for their size. I'm sure moths could be really strong, so we could scale that up.
And I think I love watching all of these movies, especially the ones with Mothra and Godzilla, because Mothra and Godzilla do have a unique relationship compared to like Godzilla's relationship with the other kaijus. And granted, it changes over time as this franchise changes over time. Like most people are familiar with the American MonsterVerse dynamic, where Godzilla is the king of the monsters and Mothra is the queen of the monsters, and they kind of have like a Mothra calms Godzilla down kind of thing. But like original movies, like this really sets the tone for like Mothra is the kaiju that has to come in and kick Godzilla's ass every now and then when he gets uppity.
Yes, this is why, and this is something that I was aware of through some pop culture osmosis, that Mothra can take Godzilla. I don't know how I learned that, because I hadn't seen any Mothra movies until, the last couple weeks, but I love that for her. Girl power.
Yeah.
Do you think that Mothra utilized girl power when she kicked Godzilla's ass?
Most definitely.
And then her kids kicked his ass? Embarrassing. To be a Dragonite taken down by 2 Caterpies? Oh.
God.
It was like level 100 Caterpies.
It's so funny, because that's the thing. Godzilla likes fighting. Godzilla especially likes fighting kaiju that are like on his level. Like he loves fighting other sluggers, because then
he can He looked like he was hurting.
Yeah, well, he's hurting, but like Godzilla at the end of the day, like he'll take on all comers. Like he will, he'll slap Anguirus around. He'll fight King Kong just because King Kong is there. And like he loves fighting giant monsters who will engage with him on like all right, let's get in and just beat the crap out of each other until one of us is down. I think Godzilla hates fighting Mothra, because there is no dignified way for Godzilla to fight Mothra. Like this creature had not an ounce of dignity in this entire film. It was the most undignified we've ever seen Godzilla. Oh yeah.
And yet it's not. Godzilla wasn't silly. He was, but he wasn't silly the way that he was in some of the other Godzilla movies that we've seen before this.
Yeah, this is leagues above King Kong versus Godzilla.
Which is, Honda, the line that you are walking here, I don't know how you're doing it.
It's great. Hey, listen, there's a lot of reasons for Godzilla lasting the test of time, and one of those big reasons is Ishiro Honda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The true king of monsters.
So you already know my rating, 5 out of 5. I love this movie. Mothra versus Godzilla is in my top 5. We'll see if that changes, but I doubt it. Kayla, what would you rate this movie?
I think I would probably go 3 out of 5 or 3.5 out of 5. Again, largely for like the cultural impact ultimately of the film. But yeah, it was like a fun film. I did not like one of our hero characters that much, but I did appreciate the way that Honda was able to fit a lot of radical messaging in his popcorn film.
Yeah.
Which, you know, it's cool. And the kaiju fights were fun, and it was fun to see Mothra again. I do enjoy Mothra. So yeah, I would say probably 3.5 out of 5.
Hell yeah.
I'm harsher on these movies than you are. I don't think I've rated did I rate Gojira 5 out of 5? I can't remember.
I think you rated. I'm gonna have to write up a list actually and like post these on our socials
of what the ratings are.
Yeah, because we keep doing these ratings and then we forget what we rated the movies. I know I rated Gojira 5 out of 5. I think you were like 4.5 out of 5 or something like that.
Probably, probably.
We'll double check.
I don't pass out. I love movies, but I also don't pass out 5 stars a lot. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Like I think my 3 out of 5 is perhaps. For me, a 3 out of 5 is like more favorable than somebody else's 3 out of 5.
Mm-hmm.
But that's also, again, because it's like, well, I don't pass out a lot of 5 out of 5s. And that's not because I don't like love a lot. Like, it's not that I don't love a lot of movies the way that other people might. You know, people might say 5 out of 5, that was a wonderful movie. And I'll be like, that also was a wonderful movie. 4 out of 5. Because my 5 out of 5s, I'm like, this is... You know, it's a 6 out of 5, actually. You know what I mean?
I think
Does that make sense?
Yeah. The main thing here is that with my rating system, it's less of me comparing these to, like, all movies, and more, is this, how good of a Godzilla film is this?
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah.
I don't think I can... Well, this is why we're co-hosts.
Yeah.
Because we're bringing 2 different viewpoints to the podcast. If we were too similar in thought process, there'd be no point except to have 2 different voices.
Yeah.
For the sake of variety.
And I am very interested in hearing your thoughts on our next movie, which, Kayla, which one is that?
Oh my god, I've been waiting for this one. Next, we'll be watching 1964's Ghidorah, the Three-Headed Monster. You can legally find this for free on services like Tubi, Crackle, Pluto TV, and Plex. If you liked this podcast, be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, leave a comment, and share with a friend. Follow us on social media. We got the links in the show notes. We also have a Ko-fi. You can support us there and get access to cool bonus content like extra episodes and access to the private Discord where you can talk with other geeks about Godzilla and all things Digital Kaiju. Check it out.
Gorilla Whale is a production of Digital Kaiju Studios. It is hosted and produced by Kevin Carpenter and Kayla Knutson. Gorilla Whale has no official affiliation with Toho, Legendary, or any other companies associated with the Godzilla franchise. We thank you for watching along with us, and until next time, watch out for kaiju.
Bye!